Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
In part one, Buck actually started with the end destination, and he explained trail marker 7 is a love relationship with God. And today, all we're really gonna do is we're gonna talk about this 0 through 2 of how it is that we get here. Trail marker 0, it is very simply exploring. There's only one question that matters in trail marker 0. Who is Jesus? Now, should you land on the conclusion Jesus is Lord, you are automatically on the first trail marker, new beginnings. It's the idea that it is by grace you have been saved. And as that foundation flips upside down, it starts to create kind of this long, dark hallway. And that's why we call this second trail marker between a rock and a hard place. This is a growth stage. And if we misinterpret it, we may just get off the trail. All you can really do in trail marker 2 is persevere, because that's what leads us into the third trail marker and beyond.
I think it is pretty fun that it's an early morning podcast.
Yeah.
I shared this, as I was coming in. I just had a cold brew coffee. Usually we do these at 2 p.m.
Yeah, I was going to say, people probably don't know when you normally record anyway.
No, it's always 2 p.m., and that's like my worst hours.
Your red zone.
My red zone, yes.
Carrie Nieuwhof book.
Carrie Nieuwhof book, at your best. And,
it's like self-defeating now. It's like, I can't work at that time of day.
I know.
It's like a limiting belief.
It's like 1:59, 2 p.m., I'm done. I'm toast.
Nothing productive left.
Yeah.
But 8
8
a.m.
a.m.
green zone, so this should be
I know,
life-changing.
8 a.m., I feel good.
This
is
good.
Great.
And you even feel good despite your last couple weeks. You have energy.
I do.
I feel like that's a miracle in and of itself.
Yes. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good.
Mm-hmm. So anyways, I know that you are now the host again, which I've carried that heavy burden the last couple of weeks. But
well, thank you for carrying that for me.
But before you get to host and ask questions,
yes,
I have another question for you.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you had time to tune in as you're trying to keep a new human alive the last couple of weeks, but I have been asking all of the podcast guests, inspired by you and Ashley, what their favorite part of parenting is. Mm-hmm. Because you and I talk about this all the time. I don't know if it's ministry or cultural, but everybody always leads with these horrible things and things that are broken or things that kids break or in trouble at school or throwing up on something or whatever. And I'm like, man, if parenting's so great, I know most of it's joking, but why do people complain about their kids so much? So I've asked this really helpful question for me. Maybe not be helpful for anybody else, but to focus on, if you do have kids, reflect on it. But like, what is your favorite part of parenting? And all these parents so far have had kids in their teens. So your child is doubling in life every few days right now.
Yep.
So what is your favorite part of being a dad now that you're back?
Yeah. Well, I've got a lot of experience to talk about this, So
wisdom.
Yep. Yeah, I think 16 days now would be my total dad experience. So a lot to impart. It's interesting. I think I can share something that every non-parent is going to roll their eyes at, and every parent might roll their eyes at too, just because maybe I'm in that honeymoon phase, or maybe this is what being a parent is about. But last night we had your brother and Kendall over to meet Grayson and hang out, and then we were like telling them about how great it was and all this stuff, and then they left, and we go to change Grayson's diaper, and I lean down. He doesn't like getting his diaper changed. He's always screaming, so I put my finger in his little fingers, and I lean down, and I'm like, "Hey, buddy, it's okay. Shh, it's okay." And he looks me in the eyes, and then next thing I know, I'm getting hit with pee in my face. He's making eye contact. Like, little dude is sneaky.
Staring right at you.
Staring right at me, and he's like, "Dad, watch this."
Already playing games.
Yeah. And I had like pee dripping from my glasses.
Oh, that's good.
And I just froze.
Thanks for the image.
Yeah, but the thing with that I never thought I would say is that I wouldn't trade that for anything already.
Wow.
There's just something about looking at your DNA And like, oh my goodness, like the verses, like God knit this human together in Ashley's womb and he shares our DNA. Like, I don't know. I just think there's something designed. Like I can't explain it. I think the first week of being a dad and people say how it's going, I think I tried to explain it.
Yeah.
And I just can't.
You can't explain
and it's just like, God said, be fruitful and multiply. And it's like, okay, I get it. Like this multiply thing, it's like, it's beautiful. Yeah. It's really, really cool. And so
I wonder if like parents on like kid number 4 would share that kind of a story with the same joy.
Yeah.
Or if that's a kid number 1 story.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't speak to it. But
yeah. Yeah. I texted Norcross last night and I told him, because he's had 5 boys.
Yeah.
So he's told me he's been peed on multiple times. and he just said, man, I haven't even met this kid and I really like him. Was his response.
We're all pro Grayson.
Yeah.
Like,
so
way
far,
to go, kid.
Yeah. So far, he's a comic genius.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
Is, just enjoying it.
Well, it is good to have you back. It's crazy how close you are to that moment. Like we talk about that moment on stage, like holding your child for the first time, world changes, you just experienced it.
Yeah.
Like you just went through it.
Yeah. And I would say too, we talk about some of the things that Buck has said that have made us go like, Buck, you shouldn't say that on stage.
Yeah.
And one of them where he's like, I'm going to breathe deeply of my children.
Yeah.
And we're like, what are you talking? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I was holding Grayson and he's sleeping and we're just in the rocker and I literally like leaned down to like, to breathe deeply. And I was kind of like, okay, I kind of get it. Like, he like, you smell and it's like, wow. But at the same time, I'm not going to talk about the way Buck does.
Yeah. Well, we debated this last week, actually.
Did you really?
And I was kind of telling him, like, he was like, you always make fun of me. I'm like, okay, I think I make fun of the way that you articulate it. Like, as soon as you start talking about, like, sniffing children, we're in an area that's not really okay. Like, breathing deep of the moment, breathing deep with, okay.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I think it's a specific Buckism that makes me like.
It's like mug down.
Right.
Like nobody else says mug down.
He's like, that's normal. We're like, no, it's not normal.
Yeah. But we love him.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
Should we move on?
Yeah, so let's jump into content. So it's funny, I'm kind of catching up on podcasts and messages because I've been out for a little bit, but I listened to your message driving in today.
That means a lot when you have a 16-day-old. So
yes.
I appreciate that.
Yes. I did listen to you twice the speed. So you were like, trail mark, it was like really fast.
See, that's how I normally listen back to it too when I'm trying to eval. And then when people are like, oh, you're rushed or you talk too fast, I'm like, no, I can talk way faster. Yeah. You'll still understand me. It's fine.
Yeah. But I really enjoyed it. I've read Mansion's book, the book that we're talking about throughout this series a little bit. And I love that we're using some of these resources in our series more often nowadays.
Yeah.
Because it really is like pulling just from great truths that other people have articulated really well and like kind of repackaging it in our own way. And I just love the trail marker analogies, like the way, you talked about going to Banff and what that felt like and it makes so much sense. And as I was listening to you talk this morning, I literally had the thought in my mind of I can pinpoint parts in my faith journey where I was going through that thing and then I was going through that thing and then I experienced that. And I wish I would have had some sort of like roadmap to go to normalize. Because sometimes, when we use like the level language here at Northpoint and something's like a level 1 thing, it's not that big of a deal. Something's level 10, oh, this is a really big deal. Well, sometimes like level 3 or 4 things feel like level 10.
Right.
And when you normalize them, it really helps it go, oh, okay, this is a big deal, but it's not as big of a deal as I thought. This is part of the journey. And that's just really, empowering. It's really helpful to learn.
Yeah, well, like in both of the analogies that we kind of have going, like traveling, knowing what to expect, planning well, what I mean? Knowing what's normal, knowing what gear you need to bring, knowing whether you need a bathing suit or snow gear. I mean, like you get that. That can make or break a vacation, knowing the best places to visit and all that kind of stuff. And in the relationship, vein as well. Like if you just have are just completely aimless in the dating world and have like no idea what the goal is to this or how to do this or your early days of marriage, that's about as far as we made it in the analogy, and it'll keep going as you think later in marriage and so on. But if you have like no guidance, no tools, no help, like you're just trying to figure it out, you're gonna like unnecessarily take more steps backwards than you would have if you had some of these tools. So it makes just as much sense to me that we'd have it in faith world too.
Yeah, for sure. So I think in this podcast I want to drill down a little bit more on these.
You can have children
been a while
and
since
still
I've
have
talked.
your voice crack.
Yeah. He's gonna be like
gonna
going through
happen
middle
forever.
school. Is like, Dad, is it gonna happen to me forever too? Yeah. I'm like, son, maybe. It really might. I want to drill down on these trail markers a little bit more because they're just so dang helpful to know kind of what we're going through in our faith journey. So let's talk about 0. And then we're going to look at 1 and 2 because that was kind of the part of the series that you were doing. And so when you think about trail marker 0, you talked about this a little bit, but let's expound upon it more. What do you see when you look around and you're at trail marker 0 in your faith journey?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because part of the reason we've even talked about, we branded this podcast Overtime is because we have so much we want to say on a Sunday and have to cut it down. And I still went too long this week and so on. But one of the things I cut out was like almost anything personal and just like, what did that feel like? So we defined it and gave steps and stuff. But I mean, the trail marker 0 for me, one of the things I am grateful for is that I became a Christian old enough that I can vividly remember it. Some people that maybe grow up in faith it's a little less clear. It's like, well, I've kind of always believed it. Maybe it became more personal here, whatever. But I mean, I have a memory, all the way up to 17 years old of like it very clearly, like this is not something that I believed in,
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting, even, my brother and I, we have like similar stories. I think he was even more anti, like he was really like against, like, hey, I'm an atheist. I think I was more like, it's just irrelevant to me. It's boring to me. But I think one of the things I was thinking about, because obviously the journey's different for everyone, is that there are so many ways that you can kind of end up at trail marker 0, like end up at the foot of the mountain to say, like, do I want to take the journey? And I think that's helpful to understand that's okay and normal, because some people are like, I haven't had that feeling, or I haven't had that experience, I have, whatever it might be. And it's like, well, I mean, a lot of people, I think about like student world especially, like come because a cute girl or guy like invited them, and that was their introduction. That's like was their exploring stages. Yeah, they're really just hoping to talk to him or her, after Inside Out is done. But I'm actually sitting here and hearing about some things that are making me think too, and that was what brought them in. And for other people, it's tragedy later in life. Other people, it's this kind of like gap of meaning. I'm not happy or satisfied or fulfilled. It's a midlife crisis. Some people are just very intellectual, black and white, and I just need to know why we're here, and I'm going to investigate that.
I would say that was me too. That was kind of mine is, early on in high school. I didn't grow up in church either. And so early on in high school, it was kind of like you're getting bombarded with these questions of what do you want to go to college for? And what do you want to do when you grow up? And what about this? And I think it was intellectual for me. It was like, well, there's this thing over here. And if that's true, that's going to really change a lot of things in my life. Yeah. I want to go discover if that's true or not. Yeah. And that's when I came to Northpoint. And that was kind of the beginning of trail marker 0 for me.
Right. And that's what I think I want to clarify for people. Like if somebody is in trail marker 0 listening to this, like they're like, I'm trying to navigate faith and like, what do I believe about it? Or if you're a Christian, and you're thinking back to, or maybe more importantly, you're thinking about your friends that are at trail marker 0. I just almost like want to like normalize for people that this is the broadest in terms of scope and experience. We talk about our vision to make Jesus relevant for everyone in Greater Austin, and then we have all these debates about, okay, but like everyone is really, really, really broad, So there's all kinds of categories that you could find yourselves in terms of, if you're unchurched, like, well, what does that even mean? And so some people have an antagonistic view in this. Like some people are looking for reasons that Christianity is not real because
like Lee Strobel, like the message,
totally, 100%. Yeah, there's bad church experiences, or they believe like religion at large hurts people, or whatever it is. Some people are just very neutral. That's what I'm saying. I was more in a neutral category of it's just like it just didn't matter. I didn't feel guilty that I didn't go to church. I wasn't against people that went to church. It just was not like a part of my life or rhythm. So I was like, okay, whatever, just you do you. Some people are really hopeful. Like some people are wanting it to be true. Some people even struggle. Like I almost want to pretend it's true because I'd love if it was, but I'm just struggling to get there. I think of, Jordan Peterson is like a super intellectual version of that, but he has expressed, I'm going to live as if God is true. It seems like he wants it to be true, and he's struggling like, okay, but if I commit, it changes everything. Like he has an appreciation on this side for how much changes. Yeah. And so, I don't know if that's helpful to say like it can feel like anything, but that's just that part of it. Skepticism. I wrote a couple things like skepticism, normal in this case. All kinds of doubts, normal. Curiosity, normal. Maybe anger or resentment, normal. Hope, normal. and coming in for a multitude of reasons. You don't have to compare yourself to somebody else's faith journey here. Just the fact that you're here is important. And that's why I also tried to clarify on that question of who is Jesus, because I think that's what simplifies it.
Yeah.
That's what it's like.
Yeah.
You don't have to go through all of human history. You don't have to know all the arguments for an existence of God. You don't have all of your church hurt or whatever. It's just, there is really one question we're trying to navigate here, and that is, who is Jesus?
Yep.
So,
yeah. And I would say too, I've talked about this before, but Blaise Pascal has like a great analogy. He was I think it was 16th or 17th century mathematician and physicist, and he has this great analogy. It's called Pascal's wager. And he basically, in terms of what trail marker zero, the importance of trail marker zero in our lives, because a lot of people, a lot of people don't even give weight to the fact that they're at trail marker zero.
Yeah.
And they kind of avoid it, whether or not they're going to like take the next step or not.
Right.
And he has this incredible analogy where he says like, you really can't avoid it because you're going to live your life one way or the other.
Right.
And it's this concept of like, if I was like, hey Jordan, we're going to go on a trip, and can you let me know if you can go? We're going to leave in 30 days. And you're like, sure, I'll let you know.
Yep.
And then I come to you 20 days. Hey, are you going to go or not? And you're like, I'm still thinking about it. Eventually I'll keep coming to you, and you're like, I don't know. But then I'm going to go, hey, car's packed in the driveway, we're leaving, are you coming or not? And you're at that point, if you don't decide, I'm leaving without you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of the idea with God, is like, we're eventually going to, if we decide we believe in God or not, we're eventually going to die one day.
Yeah.
And the decision is going to have been made at that point.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's why so many people, I think it's important to reference that, because so many people sit at trail marker zero and they never decide whether or not they want to take a step.
Yeah.
Well, eventually they're going to have never taken a step, and that's going to be their decision.
Yeah.
And if it's all true, I just think we owe it to ourselves to decide whether or not we're going to take a step or not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's that important in my eyes.
Yeah. And that's why I was trying to push people a little on Sunday, because I know there's this, I'm not trying to decide for you. I'm not trying to say, like, I want you to land on this because it's right. And at the same time, I'm like, okay, but you got to answer it. Just because it's exact. I don't want to just repeat what you just said, but it's just not neutral either way. There's not like an avoidance option.
Yes.
If you say yes, if you say no, like, there are massive implications in either direction.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But yeah. And I was thinking, on a personal, because that was part of the goal, is just what did it like feel like in this stage? Like, YouTube was helpful for me in this stage. Books were helpful for me in this stage. Some of that's just my wiring and personality. And while I would like to believe it was all like a black and white, clear, logical decision, I mean, I think relationships were as important or more important than anything. Yeah. Like, there were a couple guys, you were one of them, a couple of guys that were like, oh, these people are my friends and they're normal. You know what I mean? I used to think like church was weird. It was going to brainwash you. It was whatever. It was like, I love these people. I like hanging out with these people. These are smart people. And faith is important to them. That's interesting to me. The Jeff Browns of those days and Chris McSorley's, like our early small group leaders, just like, being able to have conversations with these like normal guys and like something they'd really thought through. I had never experienced that. I thought it was forced on you because your mom and dad believed, because you felt guilty, because whatever. And these were people that had real reasons for what they believed in. And that was new and refreshing to me. So I loved, those conversations, and loved the freedom to ask questions and what about, and this doesn't make sense to me. And so you're saying like, and those days were all a part of Trail Marker Zero for me, which was like a very, exploratory type time.
Yeah. Yeah, so. For sure. Yeah. I mean, and Buck being, one of those as well.
100%.
Both just from a listening in the crowd, early days of Northpoint, to him and bringing questions in, and kind of his style really being open to bringing those questions in. Yeah. And then also, like, I think the closer we got to him, this was probably more Trail Marker 1 and 2, but the closer we got to him, the more there was that space for those questions to be asked. And having that space was amazing. Yeah. Yeah. No, he's the guy, and I share this. It's maybe less common for people that have grown up in the Bible Belt in the South or whatever, but coming from Ohio, I mean, he was the first guy on stage I'd ever seen with jeans. Like, that was just, to me, it was robes and pews, and I was like, I couldn't connect. I didn't understand. It felt, 500 years kind of out of date, and I was like, I don't get it. Yeah. And he was the first that I kind of like, was like, whoa, that's like a dude I can connect with, can relate with, you know? Yep. So, but yeah. I also think, I'll just say a quick plug. If somebody finds themselves in Trail Marker Zero, I think starting point here at Northpoint is a great next step.
Yes.
It's literally designed for people who are at Trail Marker Zero. If you're unsure, you have questions, but you don't know where to go, you don't know what to explore, starting point is literally designed for people who are coming back to church, unsure about Christianity. And it's like, I don't know the exact length of it. It's 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably going to kick off again in January.
Yeah, it's January is the next one. That's to gen that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a great next step for somebody to go, okay, I want to decide if I'm going to take this journey or not. What do I do?
Yep. 100%.
So let's go to trail marker number 1. Cool. What does trail marker number 1 look like? What do you see? What do you experience when you're there?
Yeah, so I said hope and optimism is the most, I think, of what you're going to see around you. And I want to be careful in that. Again, some people overemphasize how emotional this experience can be. And I really think a lot of that has to do like more with your personal wiring, sometimes even like a stage of life you're in. Does this happen for you when you're a teenager versus in your 50s or, all that kind of stuff. But there's this general feeling of what could be as so much is switching. So, I mean, at a practical, I remember like in the Trail Marker 1 days, like, we would set up and tear down at Northpoint, and then I would just want to stay at the building. It was like, I just wanted to be around it, not looking for excuses to jump out early. I just wanted to be around these people. I wanted to be around this place, This is like awkward to admit publicly because it's one of those weird Christian things, but like I had never read my own Bible. I didn't even recognize that there were like multiple translations. And so Mardell is like the Christian bookstore over here in Cedar Park. And I went over probably a month or two span and bought like 5 or 6 different Bibles, just because whoa, there's different ones. And I got my like name imprinted in gold on the bottom of each. And I thought that was so cool. And I think 4 of them I never opened. And, one of them, like I read like a couple of chapters and made some notes. So, but it was like this excitement.
And now you use your iPhone or your iPad.
Yeah, exactly. Like, but it was just, I wanted to be around it. I wanted to learn it. I wanted to like, wow. It was this new clarity, I remember having a conversation in those days. I sat down with my mom who had, her church experience was similar to mine in terms of a very traditional, very different type of church, and asking her like, hey, how do you get to heaven? And she like had no clear answer for me. And she was like, 10 commandments was the best she had. Yeah. And so it's just like recognition of like grace, this recognition of like Jesus, this recognition of like, oh, I'm good. Like, that was so like this huge weight lifted off, I think, more than anything is what it feels like. And this newfound kind of excitement and passion and connection to that was very real and very strong for me, in those kind of days.
Yeah, I would say similarly for me. I think it's, making that decision. I know, and this is probably interesting to point out too, you didn't have like a moment where you're like, okay, I believe all this is true. Right. It was probably more of a season for you. I've heard you say that before. Yeah. And I had more of a moment. It was a specific, we used to do the point at Northpoint, which was like the Inside Out at the time. Yeah. And I just remember one specific one. There was the song on, there was this thing we were doing, we were praying, and I was like, okay, I'm in. Yeah. I believe this is true, and I accept this is probably going to change everything about my life. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that was the point for me. And some people have a moment, some people have a season, and then they look back and they go, oh my goodness, I think I'm a Jesus follower. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. And sometimes you find yourself at Trail Marker 1 and you kind of didn't really mean to get there, but all of a sudden you're there and you're like, okay. Yeah. All right, here we go. Yeah.
Well, I think some of that too is almost maybe not having the language to understand what's happening inside of you and so on, or the tools or the map, if you will, like I do think like if I was, advising somebody, I think delineating it with a moment, a conversation that starts now, God, I give my life to, I think that's like, really great and helpful. And it's the Romans 10:9 that we talked about, and at the same time, the metaphor still works for me to be like, there are people in my life that I vividly remember the first time I saw them. And there's all kinds of people that I'm like, I know it was in this season. I know it was like 6th grade. I know it like, I'm like, I don't know like the moment I saw you and like, this is the day we became friends. Yeah. And so I think with that, it was a little bit more of like, okay, I like this more and more. I'm more and more open to it. I'm getting more and more questions answered. And at the end of that, like kind of summer, that was that boot camp, that Camp 75, I was like, I'm very confident Jesus is who he claimed to be. And I remember praying one time by myself. I'm like, in case I missed it, I'm going to go ahead and check this box. And I'm just going to like, have this memory of praying and saying like, Jesus, I want, but
God, I just want to make sure we're good.
So, but I have heard that from people, and I think it, it's another one where it could look a little different. for each of those.
Yeah.
So,
and I do think part of maybe Western church culture, even us, I think at Northpoint, to some extent, we miss an opportunity at Trail Marker 1 to make a moment out of Trail Marker 1, because what would happen when you look at, the book of Acts and you look at Jesus' time is somebody would say, hey, I make this decision. And they're like, let's go to the river because we've got this thing that we do that actually marks this in your life. And it's something that you can do to go, okay, I'm putting kind of my foot on the ground, and you get baptized and you go down, and it's symbolic, and it's not the thing that seals you. It's just a public profession of faith. And I would just say to anybody listening, and you're like, yeah, I have taken that step to follow, to accept Jesus into my life. Like, you should get baptized. Like, you should make a moment out of that. That is huge. That is a celebration. And that's what baptism is for. And it's a great next step. And we love to celebrate baptism at Northpoint.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that, because Buck gave me that feedback to include it, and I just forgot. No other reason than that. And so it's a really good,
And if somebody wants to get baptized, go to our website, go click on what's next. It's the big orange button. You can't miss it. And you should be able to just hit those filters and go, I'm new to faith, and baptism should pop up for you. And you can click there and you can sign up to get baptized.
100%. Yeah, all of those are part of that. A lot of those interest things, that baptism, very symbolic moment, very kind of stake in the road, very like I'm going public with this and sharing. Usually is a season where people start attending church if they weren't already before. It's usually they get plugged into one or start watching somewhere or whatever it might be. Might be a season where you try to serve, or how can I be more involved? I mean, there's all of this, like I'm making it practical and real and learning, a lot of new things. It's a lot of absorbing, for the first time. That brings out a lot of excitement, in that time period.
For sure. So let's go on to trail marker number 2. And we'll wrap up with this one. But what do you see? What do you experience at trail marker number 2?
Yeah, well, this is where, I'm so grateful. I think about really like early mornings, meeting with Buck for years and years as like him guiding through and holding my hand through like trail marker 2. Because I think if I didn't have somebody that I was on the other side of for a lot of the season, I think it would be just so confusing. Because this is where we talk about, if you didn't watch Sunday, this is the point where you've gone too far, like you've seen too much, you've learned too much, that there would be pain and struggle in either direction. And what I mean by that is you can't go back to the things that brought you comfort before. Like you could. It's not like God's going to like strike you with a lightning bolt, but they're not going to satisfy you in the same way, because now you have this realization that you were made for more. Now there's this conviction inside of you. There's this guilt or this shame if you go back to it, Right. So I was obviously vague on Sunday, but you go to any number of things. It could be a habit or an addiction, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be partying, it could be pornography, it could be any list of things where you're like, before I didn't give that a lot of thought. Everybody around me did it, and that was my stress reliever. That was my go-to. Well, now you can try and go back to those things, but it leaves a dissatisfaction inside you that was bigger than before. You wake up the next morning like, I'm not sure that's okay. I'm not sure that's compatible with what I'm doing. And again, not because God is saying my value or my identity is changing in that, but because as I grow in my relationship with Him, I'm realizing these things are incompatible from me growing in connection with Him, growing in intimacy with Him. These things create disconnection from Him. That's what sin does, right? It disconnects us from God. And so I think you can't go backwards to that, and you're starting to have this realization of like, oh my gosh, everything I've known, all my comforts are gone. They're not helpful anymore. And yet I'm not like, I'm this new creation in terms of like spiritually my identity, but I haven't started really living out of that yet. I haven't done the hard work of, changing habits and behaviors and reactions and all of this kind of stuff. And that's a long road in front of me. In fact, it's a lifelong journey. So, but I'm realizing that's in front of me too. And God is exciting to me, but He's not necessarily like my true place of like refuge and comfort and where I go to instead of these old comforts. And so you realize there's going to be struggle on either side, and as you start to struggle with some of those, this becomes some of the really heavy, like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I fix this? Why am I not changing as fast as I could? Why are these, temptations still so strong? Are these desires for the world still so strong? I think in the Mansions book, he says you feel like you're schizophrenic. You feel like, you're a hypocrite. You have these two very strong conflicting desires. And at times you might feel just downright like disgusted with yourself, like, why did I desire that? Why did I think that? Why did I act on that? Like, this is so incompatible with who I'm trying to be or what I say I believe. And it creates this, tremendous turmoil inside of us if we don't numb it out, and we know we pay attention to it, it creates this like a tremendous turmoil inside of us that really can feel like a weight. Generally there's going to be a lot of shame, and I try to clarify, like, shame, conviction can be from God, and he may be convicting us, like, and certainly he probably is, like the Holy Spirit's convicting us in this, but the shame is like the misplaced identity. Like, now I am bad. I am a failure. I am disgusting. I am not a Christian, or I am not saved. Like, I'm not a child of God anymore. Like, these things, identity-based things that we struggle with, those voices aren't from God, but we feel a lot of that. We put a lot of that on us in this time period. And so that's what makes this second trail marker just at times so, overwhelming. And of course I had to do it in about 8 minutes on, Sunday, just talk about that. So there are ways in which God is also like, we're growing with him, that he is more intimate, that I am trusting him. There are moments and bright spots that's like, I'm more connected to him than ever. I feel a deeper peace. The roller coaster is kind of flattening out in terms of like, there's this more consistency, like a constant awareness of him. Not just when I jam out my car to my favorite song, or not just when I go to church, but like, he's always there. Like, so that's becoming true. And that is really wonderful. But it's a refining process that is, taking away a lot of edges as we move in that direction. That is really overwhelming. Yeah.
What are some of the things that people bump into in trail marker number 2? Because I think part of you said this on Sunday. You said that a lot of people stop here and it's a little bit too overwhelming, and they don't really go any further in their faith journey. And potentially part of the reason is because you look at everything that culture says, and if you just react to culture your whole life, and you say yes to every commercial, every message that comes your way, well, then you could very well take a step and become a Christian and have, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, which would be counter to what Jesus said. He said, don't be slave to the lender. You could have had, tens of, sexual partners. You could have divorces. You could have all of these things. And I'm talking about these things very morally objective right now. I know these things are big deals, and they can cause a lot of hurt and pain in our lives. But all of a sudden you look at this pile, and then you look at what Jesus said and what Paul writes in the New Testament, and you go, where do I even start with this, right?
Yeah.
And then you also kind of feel inadvertently like it's all on your shoulders to figure it out. And that's where, you talked about grace being the thing that, towards the end of trail marker number 2, you realize, I thought it was all on my shoulders to figure it out.
Yeah.
But it's actually grace. Jesus already did it all for me.
Yeah.
I just let him continue to kind of do that work in me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so I think it's a lot, but that was a long way to rephrase the question. But what are the types of things we see at trail marker number 2 that we bump into and struggle with?
Yeah, well, this is where I do think the struggles are different based on our expectations and understanding of where we're at. So this is where the young married analogy actually made a lot of sense to me, and that for some people, those are incredibly difficult years. It's actually not that common to get divorced in your first year or first couple of years of marriage, because it's just, I thought it was going to be bliss in Instagram, and it's so much more difficult, and I'm not willing to do any of the work. I'm not trying to, again, minimize anything somebody's gone through, but that happens, right? That's a common thing. I wasn't prepared for, I wasn't ready for. And so people that don't maybe have this expectation of what's going to happen in this kind of like refinement process, it can feel overwhelming. And especially the cultural thing, I think you just said, is really big too. I was talking to a guy, just this past week, who is like, after Sunday was like, I think I really resonate with a lot of Mansion 2, of Trail Marker 2. And he was saying, like, his big thing was, I'm not experiencing joy anymore. And so I think something is like fundamentally wrong or broken, because I remember the days of so much joy, and that's so few and far between now, and that's like a real thing. Like, all of a sudden my faith feels at times more exhausting as I'm figuring this out, than it does like life-giving, and I remember the days of all I wanted to do was just hang around the building. I remember the days of like, is that a new Bible that I don't have yet? And there was so much excitement, and now I just kind of waking up every morning feeling like a failure. I'm waking up every day like, it just feels like more of a grind. I'm waking up like, where is the joy? What is the point? How do I get back to that? Something feels like wrong or messed up here.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very common, emotion to experience. And then where we go with that from there is kind of interesting, because that's where I talked about, some of the sins may grow. And when you ask, like, what are you bumping into? Like, you might be bumping into, like, I'm struggling with something more post relationship with Jesus than I was pre. And now I'm really confused because now I'm like, obviously I'm not actually saved. Obviously it hasn't actually taken root. But my whole point in trying to explain that was you're struggling with it more because of the now shame that you're experiencing, which is actually like misinterpreted conviction, misinterpreted like healthy guilt. And we're
misinterpreting the gospel in a sense too.
100%. Yeah. And so, again, that's where I try to say like, if you're, whatever the addiction is, it could be, drugs, alcohol. I mean, it could be gossiping, like, and all of a sudden you're extreme gossip and you got to tear people down more to make you feel better about you. It could be pornography. And it's like, man, I used to look at that one time and it was a stress reliever. But actually now that I feel awful about myself. What did I just do? And what does that mean in my marriage? And so now it's like, I'm going to go look again because I just feel so bad about myself. And that never used to be a reason that you even went to it before. And so now it's like growing. Now this thing inside of you is growing. And that could be applied to that pattern. It could be applied to any sin in our life that we're struggling with. And those were the ones I was trying to hit on. Like there's like sneaky ones you're going to discover for the rest of your life. I'm not talking like just selfishness, or pride or, those are core ones that we're going to like for the rest of our journey realize how much we really struggle with those. And that's coming for us.
Yeah. The further you get, the more you realize how far you've missed the mark.
Yeah. The gap between us and God was way bigger than we could have ever comprehended,
Yep.
But there are some debilitating ones that are just, they're like keeping us from that next step. Cause I'm constantly feling like God's angry with me. I'm constantly feeling like, piece of crap walking into the building and it's like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So. And I think Jesus said this. It was Jesus for Paul. But he said, mixing it up, the pure in heart will see God clearly. And there's that like pure is not the sense of like, you must be perfect.
Yeah.
But it is like, you can't have things that are fogging the lens in which you view God.
Right.
And if there are sins in your life that are constantly pulling your mind and pulling your energy back away from God, then it's going to be really difficult to see him clearly. It's going to be really difficult. It's like it's like, to use a trail analogy, you're on the mountain and all of a sudden fog just rolls in and you're like, how do I get to the next marker? I can't even see in front of me.
Yeah.
And that's what those sins can sometimes do.
Right.
And that's where you got to kind of invite God into that, invite somebody else, like you talked about Buck being there in trail marker number 2, and ask for help. How do I get rid of this thing, or how do I combat this thing? And how do I get rid of shame and view myself differently so I can move forward and continue to grow in my faith?
Yep. Yeah, it's exactly what you just said, because that's what I was nervous that I would miscommunicate on Sunday, is that it was just about behavior modification. Like, hey, to be, further along in this journey, you just have to be a better person. And I'm like, no, that's not at all what I'm trying to say. It's this recognition that to go wrestle with these requires that leaning on God's grace in a whole different way. I mean, that was really cool, and that switch from trail marker 0 to 1, and you hear that and you believe that. You don't even doubt that in that moment. When you start to doubt it is when you start to struggle with all these things, and you're like, whoa, this sin thing inside of me is serious, and it's forgiven. I'm going to heaven regardless of how much I navigate these, but it's about so much more than heaven. Like, his grace meets us where we're at right now, and we get to now grow in our intimacy with him right now, and those are some of the big ways that force us to lean on him in ways we just never had previously.
Yeah. I'll wrap up with this analogy and then we'll be done with it. But one of the mentors in my life once told me that becoming a Christian is kind of like booting up in a new operating system. Like we're Mac users, so if you're a Windows user, I'm sorry, this analogy is not perfect, but like you've been booted up as a PC your entire life, and it's clunky and it's slow and it crashes, and that's how we've been doing things. And now you're a Mac, but if you try to run Windows on the Mac, you can, but it's just you're not meant to boot up that way. Like you're a new creation. It says you're a son or you're a daughter of God. You've been adopted into God's family. Yeah. But we're so used to booting up in our previous way that it's like we're not quite smooth yet in booting up in our new identity as a new creation. Yep. And so, like you said, it's not about behavior. It's about looking at what Scripture says and being on the other side of people who kind of reinforce the idea that no, that's just, sin is not your master anymore. Like something different is now true about you because your identity has changed. Let that change you from the inside out, and watch what Jesus does in your life and to the sin in your life as you accept that is true, and that sinks from your head to your heart. Yeah, that analogy works perfect for me. We just had somebody on our team that switched from a Windows to a Mac, and she had to learn the Mac, and she's still discovering new things she can do, multitask, split screen, this is awesome. Yeah. But she had to put in some time to learn it. She wasn't fast at it at first, but it's going to be so much better for her once she knows how to
to use it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I remember when she got her computer, I got an Apple sticker and I put it on her computer just to cover it up, make her feel better.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. Anyways, this has been a super helpful conversation. You know, you ended your message with the question of now what? So when we find ourselves at the end of trail marker number 2, we are sinking into the identity of who Jesus says we are. We're not perfecting our lives again, but we're sinking deeper into being a son or a daughter of God. Where do we go from there? Because apparently there's 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 left in front of us.
Yeah.
But a lot of us kind of get stuck there. So Buck is going to talk about that this next week.
Yep.
I'm really excited because it feels like it's something we've never hit on before, but it's so crucial to so many people's faith journey. And so it's going to be a great conversation. So Jordan, thanks for hosting the past couple weeks, and thanks for being on the podcast today.
Glad you're back, man.
Thanks, Steve.